This is a special report from True Crime Today and the Hidden Killers podcast.
I'm Tony Bruschi. Thanks for joining us. We go now to the courtroom for segment number 1 of today's coverage in the trial of Scot Peterson, the Parkland School resource police officer charged with negligence in failing to protect the children of Parkland as a gunman went through the school executing many students. Let's go to the courtroom.
Good morning. I saw that I missed your call.
Yeah, it was very clear. I was trying to tell you that I didn't know what time we start today, but I didn't tell you that we had no internet, so not to rush. But we got it resolved.
I have a question. When we get to the when I do jury instructions and I have to make changes, I just do them up right here. Even just a simple cable. Can I use this printer here?
Yeah, the printer is connected to you.
Oh, the one I can't get all my jury instruction stuff on my.
To save them.
Yeah, they're all. I mean, I just say them back. When I make changes,
Yeah, we can get a printer cable. Yeah, I didn't see where there was one on here. Looks like it's gone, but there got to be one. Yeah, it's missing. Well, we can get one put in.
okay, no problem. Just because I do the jury instructions for the lawyers. It's just a question. Changes. Okay. Because I need it. And I feel pretty comfortable with all this stuff. I think I don't want to choose.
No, you did good. Yeah, yesterday it rained. I noticed that one of the strips went down. That's what
So I appreciate all your help. So I recognize the things. You told me this one went from here to 15 and then back to here.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
We use this setup. I had to generate it with when we were doing the cruise because we had like about 10 wireless mics in here.
That's understood. All right.
This should be good.
What do you want? Sure. You found that easy, absolutely. I would. Good morning, man. How's it going?
Great, nice to see you.
soon as I get Mr. Clare here, and as soon as I know that we have all the jurors back, we'll go back on the rest of this. No, I'm not here that whole week. Is that what I need to do? Yeah, that's the guy we're getting on board. Yeah. All right, so we'll move to the 19th.
Wait till I actually get some.
What do you mean? You just took with I would anticipate that you're we have them all here. They're all here. You have to replace this bag. And so if you guys do the off and I'll do these two.
I'll be in the back.
These are that one.
Yeah. Just give me the high sign or get the batteries back. So if you was on my team,
It's not Yeah,
you got it.
I thought it was. I gave you
North Alabama.
Oh, it's North Actually, you know what? So real quick. the record, this is State versus Scot Peterson, 197166 CF10A. I have Ms. Gomes, Mr. Kilroy, Mr. Klinger present for the state, Mr. Igosh present for Mr. Peterson. Mr. Peterson likewise is present. We are outside the presence of the jury. State, anything you need me to address before we get the witness back on the witness stand and resume the direct examination?
No, Judge.
Defense, anything you need me to address? No. Okay, one thing I need to bring your attention, juror number six brought in an email today basically saying from her company that they're going to pay her for 10 days of service, 10 days, and after that they want her to start using her PTO time. I think we're on day 5 right now. It doesn't appear to me that we're going to run the schedule that we originally discussed with them, but I would certainly think we're going to exceed 10 days. She's given me the contact information of the Director of Human Resources for her company. It would be my intention at the lunch break to reach out to that person and have a discussion with them before I start using their company's name out loud in open court regarding their support of our jury system. State, any objection?
No objection.
Defense, any objection?
No objection.
Okay, so I'll make that call at lunchtime today and see what I can get accomplished. When I get any information, I will update you on that. If I can get Sergeant Heinrich back on the witness stand, please. And then, Dan, once I have the sergeant back on the witness stand, you can bring the jury back in, please. Sir, if I could have you come right back to the witness stand, and again, if you'll pause, I'll put you under oath for you.
Yes, sir.
Should we tell the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, you may be seated. And once you're seated, if I can get you to scoot that chair all the way up,
Yes, sir.
please bring the jury back.
Jurors entering.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Come on in. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Come on in. Once you're back at those same seats, you may be seated. All right, all the parties may be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, those of you that are using the notepads, I'll give you a moment to get the notepads back out. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I hope you had a nice night last night. When we recessed the trial yesterday, we were in the middle of the direct examination of the witness. We're going to pick it up right at that point. The witness remains on the witness stand and under oath. State when you are ready. You may proceed.
Judge, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Sergeant, I'm showing you what's been pre-marked as state's I. Do you recognize this?
Yes.
Okay. Is that a photograph of you?
Yes.
Judge, at this time, the state moves into evidence what's been pre-marked as state's I. Are we going in one? State's I as state's 9.
Any objection?
None at all.
Without objection, state's I for identification will now be in evidence. That is state's Exhibit 9.
Your Honor, there's something on the screen.
Yeah, is there something on the...
I'm not sure what it is.
That was a test run.
Oh, okay. May I have permission to publish?
You may.
Sergeant, can you describe for us what we're looking at in this photograph?
Yes, that's when I met up with Officer Coker. He's one of our former canine handlers. That was after I had returned to the building with Chief McKeon, and they determined that Nicholas Cruz was no longer in the building. I linked up with Officer Coker, and that's when we started to search the areas, like I said, in the west, I guess would be the southwest area of the school.
Now, before you had determined that Nicholas Cruz was no longer in the building, is this what you were wearing when you were attempting to move closer to the 1200 building when he may have still been inside?
Yes.
And can you describe for us, is this what you were wearing when you did not have this vest on, correct?
Correct. I didn't have the vest on, nor did I have the gloves or the firearm.
Okay. And why did you place these items on?
Obviously, we thought the shooter was still at the school, or inside the school, inside the building. So that's why we were going back. He had not been caught yet.
Your Honor, permission to publish what is already in evidence as states 6-2. F2, or I don't know what letter it was.
It's state 6 is the 13 USB drive.
Yes.
Which one?
Number 2.
You want to do F2?
Yes.
Is this something that the screens need to be turned off for?
No.
No, you're okay. Go ahead. You may.
Your Honor, this isn't the wrong exhibit. I need the other one in the packet. The whole. Apologies, Your Honor.
No problem.
Sergeant, when you see yourself on the screen, will you please identify yourself?
Yeah, I can see myself out in the middle of the baseball field with the fire hose, watering the infield.
Is that on what corner of the screen?
I'm sorry, like the top, I guess top center.
At this point, this is when you're still manicuring the field.
Yep.
Sergeant, those students running, is that when you started?
I don't believe I saw them at the time, because obviously I'm still, I don't recall anybody running at the time prior to that. That was Elliot Bonner, the security specialist that I spoke to later. Or security monitor, I'm sorry, I think his actual title, I'm not sure. So you can see me there, that's where I dropped the hose. And I should be showing up here.
Is that
That's
Coach Bonner?
Elliot Bonner, correct. Security monitor,
Security
I
monitor,
think is what he is.
And Mr. Bonner is who tells you that Aaron
Yeah,
Price?
like I said, I have a very quick conversation with him, and then basically yelling at each other, and he takes off and continues to leave. So this is when I come around the corner and I actually walk into the parking lot. Just to the left is where that gate is that enters into it's like the senior, there's some faculty parking there, but there's also a senior parking lot, and that's where I encounter Kyle. You can see there's a large group of people already there. There's a bunch
The
of
top
kids.
left corner of the screen?
Yes, the left corner. There's a bunch of kids there, and you can see when the gunshots start again is when everybody starts to flee. At that point is where I'm taking Kyle along the backside of those cars, out and around the football field, back to where I originally started, back at the baseball field.
And at that point, is there any doubt in your mind that you're hearing gunshots?
No.
Sergeant, do you know who Scot Peterson is?
Yes.
Did you know him prior to this date?
Yes, like I said before, my wife worked at the school for, I think, 4 or 5 years. My son was a student there. It was not an uncommon occurrence for myself to come over after school, working at my school and going and watching my wife. My wife's a basketball coach. She used to coach the basketball team there, so would come over and watch her basketball games or watch a sporting event at the school.
Did you see Scot Peterson on the day of this incident?
No.
Did you see him enter any buildings?
No.
Did you see him render any aid to Aaron Feist?
No.
Any of the students?
No.
Did he assist you in clearing any buildings?
No.
Did you see him assist any law enforcement officer in doing anything?
I had no contact with him the entire day.
Moment confirmed. And Sergeant, do you see Scot Peterson in the courtroom today?
Yes.
Can you please identify him?
We'll
by name?
stipulate this is Scot Peterson.
Go ahead, ask your question.
No, I have no more questions, Judge.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We're in the middle of your last question.
Yeah.
I know you're sitting, go ahead, ask
Can
your
you
question.
please identify him by name?
Yes, he's sitting right there.
And what
To the
article?
left, I'm sorry, behind the computer, in a gray suit.
Thank you. Your Honor, let the record reflect the important identification.
Okay, the record shall so reflect. You may proceed.
Judge, I have no further questions.
Cross-examination, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Sergeant.
More, sir.
This is not the first time we've met. We met once before,
Yes.
and that was for a deposition, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you had said yesterday that in preparation for your testimony, you actually read through that deposition, correct?
Yes.
And that was back on June 30th of 2022, is that correct?
I'm gonna have to, I'll stipulate to you, yes.
Okay.
It sounds correct, yes.
For jurors who might not be familiar with what a deposition is, right? We know what that is. That's
Yes.
something that in 27 years in law enforcement, you've done many of them, correct? Hundreds, you would say, probably?
Yeah, probably.
All right, describe in detail so they're not lost exactly what a deposition is.
It's where you meet in front of an attorney, could be either a state attorney or a defense attorney, and they ask you questions to what your actions were and what you did during the case, or during an incident.
And there's a court reporter present,
Yes, that
correct?
records everything.
And both sides get a chance to ask you questions, right?
Yes,
Because unlike we see on TV, it's not trial by ambush, right? We get to know exactly what you're going to say,
Yes.
correct? And then the court reporter transcribes it, meaning type it up, right?
yes,
And then you get a chance to read through it for accuracy, correct?
Yes.
And it helps to refresh your recollection about something that you said over a year ago, correct?
correct.
Okay, and you did that, it helped you refresh
Yes.
your recollection. Perfect, okay. If I heard you correctly, you're a sergeant, supervisor in the K-9 unit, correct?
Currently, yes.
And that is Coral Springs Police Department, correct?
Yes, not the sheriff. No, not the sheriff's
Just so
office.
they're clear, Coral Springs Police Department is different than Broward Sheriff's Office, correct?
Yes, sir.
Broward Sheriff's Office, my client works for, you work for a completely different agency.
Yes, sir.
And while some of the areas that you patrol overlap, you are completely separate agencies, correct?
That is correct.
And I think we said it earlier, you've been with them for 27 years,
Yes, sir.
correct? And you knew my client from interactions that you had with him, correct?
Yes,
About 4 to 5 years, your son went to school there from 2015 to 2019, isn't that correct?
yes.
And you knew him to be a good person, correct?
I would call him a friend of mine.
Okay. And you never saw him be a coward in any respect, correct?
No,
Okay. And just so we're crystal clear, during the entire shooting, you never saw my client at all,
that
correct?
is correct.
Let's explain why, because you were in completely different areas,
Yes, sir.
right? So you never would have seen what my client was doing, correct?
That's correct.
How he was acting.
I never had any interaction with him the entire day.
Great. Judge, if I can approach?
Sure.
Yeah. Let me see if we can do it standing to...
Judge, something object to this demonstrative, is it being used for demonstrative? I'm not sure.
Yeah, is this a demonstrative aid to assist the witness in his testimony?
It is, yes.
Okay, so the objection's overruled. Go ahead.
Okay. So you're familiar with the campus,
Yes, sir.
correct?
Very.
So you're familiar first with the 100 building, which is where the administrators are, correct?
Yes.
Did you know that that's where my client's office is?
I knew.
Okay. You're also familiar, this is the 1200 building, correct?
Yes.
Now, if I were to tell you that it's 73 yards long, would that be consistent with your understanding of it?
Yeah, it's a long building.
3/4 of a football field long? Yes?
Yes, I mean, I would say so. I mean, I would say that the football field there and those areas are if they're drawn to scale, would be similar. So
Okay.
I would say, yeah.
And even the building next to the 1200 building, the 1300 building, that's about the same size, correct?
Yeah, I would imagine.
So from the east side of the 1200 building, all the way to the west side of the 1300 building, you're talking about a football field and a half. Is that
That
correct?
Would be, yeah, that would be a good estimate, I would imagine.
And then you add even more space between the two because there's like a courtyard area here. Is that a yes?
Yes.
How far would you estimate that courtyard area is?
Probably like 20 yards.
Okay.
Somewhere in
So
that
now we're
area.
getting closer to two football fields between the east and the west of those two buildings, correct?
I don't know what building 13 is, but it's a good distance. Yeah.
Okay. So you initially, if you could point on the board to where you were initially, we saw you on the video, you're watering the field,
Right,
right?
yes, sir. Yep.
Okay, baseball field, okay. And my client, you know where his position was.
I believe he was in his office or somewhere near the main office, I believe.
Got it. Ultimately, though, his position of cover, okay, during the shooting, Do you know where that's located?
Just based off what I've seen and stuff, I don't have any independent recollection of exactly where it is because I've never saw him. But if you tell me he was sitting, I know he was somewhere in the corridor near the end of the building.
Okay, so assuming we're saying between the 700 and 800 building over here, okay? You initially would be over there,
Yes.
correct? Mm-hmm. Can you estimate how many hundreds of yards distance between the two of you?
It's got to be several hundred yards.
Okay, I mean, he can't see what you're seeing, you can't see what he's seeing.
No.
Your view of the kids, we saw in video kids running, there is no way he could have seen any of that, correct?
Objection, not personal knowledge, speculation.
Well, it's overruled, but I don't want you to guess, sir. If you have personal knowledge, you can answer the question.
I do not.
You can say it.
I have no knowledge of what he was able to see and what he wasn't able to see.
Based upon the physicality, right, of where you were located, it would be highly unlikely for him, from where he was positioned, to see the things that you were seeing.
I can't testify to what he said or what he saw or what he didn't see. I can only testify to what I saw.
Got it. And one of the things that you said that you didn't see are the kids who were running on that video that we saw, correct?
That's correct.
There's no question, we saw it. There were kids running in your general area, correct? And you're saying on the record here, you didn't see those kids, correct?
That's correct.
You're not committing perjury, correct?
No.
You just didn't see them, correct?
That's
Right?
correct. Yes.
Now, when you were on the baseball field, you hear the fire alarm go off, is that correct?
Yes.
You didn't know what that was for, correct?
No, sir, I did not.
My guess is, I mean, fire alarms go off all the time. It doesn't mean it's a mass shooting, right?
No, like I said in my deposition, culinary students all commonly will burn something and have a fire alarm go off during school. It's not an uncommon occurrence in schools.
Correct. In fact, a lot of the kids are like, oh, here we go again, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then you hear 5 to 6 bangs, correct?
Yes.
And your initial thought was, wait, that's gunfire or no?
No, fireworks.
Correct.
Like I stated.
You thought it was fireworks. So the sounds that you were hearing are equally consistent in your mind to fireworks, firecrackers, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So you hear those shots, and you don't have a specific location of where those shots are coming from, correct?
No.
You can't say, 1200 building, correct?
No, absolutely not.
1300 building.
No.
Okay. You couldn't tell whether it was inside or outside, correct?
No, sir.
So when you're listening to those particular sounds in that particular area, there was no way to discern from the sound, the unique sound that was being created, that was from inside a building or outside a building. Isn't that correct?
Yes, not from where I was at, no.
Okay. Then you hear another round of gunfire, correct?
That's correct.
And that was before you see the kids running, correct?
Yes.
And only because you see kids running do you start to think, well, wait, that might be gunfire, correct?
Yes, sir.
So had you not seen the kids running, your thought still would have been, well, this could possibly be firecrackers, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So that extra stimulus, seeing the kids running, helped provide you some additional information,
Yes,
correct?
sir.
All right. And by the way, all this is happening on the west side of the campus, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. My client, as you know, is on the entirely opposite east side of the campus, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And there's no question, by the way, and I'm sorry you had to go through this. This was a very stressful situation.
Yes, sir.
And you've been through a lot. I mean, 27 years in law enforcement, you've seen some things. I would imagine, I do feel for you, this is trauma that you have to carry with you, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance and counsel testifying.
Yeah, it's actually sustained as to both. Go ahead, sir. Ask your next question.
This was a very traumatic experience for you,
Yes.
is it not? Okay. You encounter security specialist Bonner in his golf cart, correct?
Yes.
And he tells you that a code red had been ordered, correct?
Yes.
And did you ever, that afternoon, speak with either Anna Ramos
No.
or Assistant Principal Jeffrey Morford to determine whether it was my client who ordered the code red?
No.
Okay. Did Bonner ever tell you who he heard order the code red?
No.
Okay. Then you ran into Kyle Lamon right outside the gate by the entrance of the senior lot, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Can you show us on the board? This, by the way, now you're moving closer to the area, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And you still don't know where those shots are coming from as you approach the gate, correct?
That's correct.
And show us, if you could, where it is.
I'll have to stand up, please. Yep. So let's make sure I'm in the right place. There's a shed here. As you come through here, there's a parking lot. It goes out the parking lot, and it's right on the back side of the shed right here. There's some grassy area.
So if I saw you correctly, I won't put words in your mouth. You were rubbing where it says like Building 11.
Yeah.
What was the Building 11? That's a good place.
Yeah, that's probably pretty good.
Hold on,
place.
folks. One voice at a time. The court reporter can be one voice
I'm
at a
sorry.
time.
Yeah, we're Building 11.
Hold on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So the lawyer's going to ask the question, stop talking, then the witness is going to answer the question, and then he will stop talking, and then the lawyer will ask the next question. Go ahead, sir. You may ask your next question.
So was it fair to say that you got to where it says Building 11? Is that where you were?
Yes.
And what happens at Building 11?
Kyle is, like I said, he's running from the other area across the parking lot. I meet him there. He's crying, he's screaming, saying he's been shot. Has a cat. Yeah.
I want to say, before he tells you anything about a location, you're there with Kyle Lamons by Building 11, where you put your finger, correct? And at that point, when you're that close, you still don't know where the shots are coming from, correct?
That's correct.
You still don't know whether it's inside or outside, correct?
That's correct.
And at that point, you've heard a number. You didn't just hear one shot. You heard multiple shots, and you still couldn't discern precisely where the shots were coming from. Isn't that correct, sir?
Yes.
But Kyle Lamons, he gives you some additional information to help you discern where the shots were coming from, correct?
He does, but that doesn't happen until we get back to the locker room.
Okay, so go ahead and tell us what happened there.
So at that point, when he comes out, obviously, I think I've already testified to it, but he comes out, he has a catastrophic leg injury. Obviously, I go into saving his life is my first priority. We get him, I go down around the football field, all the way out to the baseball, back to the baseball house, the baseball locker room. Once we go in there, we start giving him first aid, bandage his leg, and at that time is when I had a conversation with him, asking him what happened, what he saw, what the description of the person. That's when I made the phone call to.
Got it. We'll pick it up there, but I want to go back.
Yes.
You did hear, after you made contact with Kyle Lamons, where you showed us where you made contact with him, you actually heard additional shots, did you not?
Yes.
Okay, well let's talk about those. While you're by the Building 11, how would you, in words, describe for the jurors who weren't there, how would you describe the sounds that you're hearing?
Loud, percussive, and reverberating off of the area. It was very, like I said, it felt like you were being shot at. It felt like you could feel the percussion of the fire, of the shooting.
All right, you said a lot, and I want to make sure that I heard you correctly. First, you said it was very loud, correct?
Yes. I'm sorry.
You also said reverb?
Yeah, reverberating, yeah.
Explain to the jurors what you mean by that, just to be crystal clear.
The sound was reverberating out, away from the building, out towards us. It was coming away from the building, bouncing off the building, coming out towards us.
And when you say bouncing off of a building, again, just to be crystal clear, what did that mean to you?
It's just the way it felt. I don't know how to explain it. It just felt like the sounds were coming out towards us. Does that make sense? If that makes sense.
Because they've never seen the school, describe how physically the buildings are set up that would account for the reverberation and the banging off things.
Yeah, they run. I mean, the building 13 is just slightly offset from building 12. So the walls run all the way along where we were. So you actually see both sides of the west side, or sorry, the north sides of those buildings. So it's one big cement barrier basically along those.
And what does that mean? What does cement do when you're talking about gunfire? Big building, right. Cement. Explain to them why that made it.
It reverberates out, makes it louder, moves it out. Like if you're shooting at a range, a closed range, it becomes louder as it moves out towards you. So that's what it felt like in that situation.
Do you believe that the buildings, the way they're configured with concrete, the way that they are, made it more difficult to discern precisely where the shots were coming from?
I felt at the time that they were coming from that area. Now, like I testified in the area of the 12 to 1300 building in that area, I couldn't tell you whether, like I testified before, I couldn't tell you whether they were inside, outside, up on the roof, third floor, second floor, first floor. I couldn't tell you that because I didn't have any active stimulus of anything. I didn't see glass breaking. I didn't see bullets being shot around me. I didn't see muzzle flash. All I could go off is what I was hearing, and there was no other visual stimulation except for the sound of the gunfire.
If you could stand up again, when you said the best you could get was to narrow it down to the area around the 1200 and 1300 building. If you I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same buildings. These two right here, 12 and 13, correct?
Yes, like when I testified earlier, I circled it on the monitor. I would say between this area right here is where I anticipated it coming. So somewhere in between the 12 and the 1300 building.
Got it.
Because I could see, I was out in this area, I could see this whole end of the building. There was nothing that I would see visually or anything along the line. So if someone was shooting out of that building, I probably would have been able to see, hear a glass break or something along those lines. So I would estimate that it was in the area of the 12 and the 1300. Okay.
But you also couldn't rule out a much larger perimeter, isn't that correct?
No, like we've talked before, that's just where I heard the gunfire. That doesn't mean that was the only place there's gunfire. That's where I heard the gunfire.
But candidly, when you were actually there in real time, it wasn't in your mind narrowed down to just that large yet circular area between the 12 and 1300 building. Isn't that correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Isn't it a fact that in real time, when you're hearing those shots from where you've described your position, you didn't narrow it down and say, well, this is only the place that those shots could be, correct?
I would tell you that if I were in the same situation that I was in that situation with a firearm, I would have gone to the area that I circled.
That wasn't the question, sir.
That's what I would do.
I got you.
That's where I believe the gunshots were coming from, so that would answer your question.
Well, isn't it a fact that you also believed that the gunfire could have come from outside of any of those two buildings, the 12 and 1300 buildings? Yes?
In that area, yes, sir.
Correct. You also included in that scenario the top of either of those two buildings, correct?
Sure. Absolutely. I guess I think I've already explained that I was not able to visually see exactly where the gunfire was. There was no other visual stimulation. I was just merely going off of what I could hear.
I got you.
Okay.
So I'm going to just run through a number of scenarios in your mind at the time, because now we know a lot more now, correct?
That's correct.
You had no idea when you're in that moment what you're dealing with, correct?
That's correct.
In fact, now we know there was one shooter, but you actually thought there could have been more, correct?
Yeah, there's always a +1 rule in law enforcement where if there's one shooter, you always believe there's a possibility of a second. It's just it's one of the training techniques that we use.
And so there's always on your mind the idea that there could be multiple shooters unless and until you're told otherwise, correct?
Yes, sir.
And even though you're hearing shots in a general 1200 to 1300 building area, you don't know whether there's other shooters around the campus, correct?
No, I did not.
That's all in play at that moment, correct?
Yes, of course.
So some of the other things that were in play, we just talked about, the tops of either of the 12 or 1300 building, correct?
Yes.
You also couldn't rule out like the neighboring buildings. I know you thought maybe 12, 1300, but it also could have been like the neighboring 6th building, right?
Based on where I was and how I heard things, I didn't believe it would have been from the 6th, nor would I have believed it would have been from the football field.
Got it. So let's narrow it down to this area, correct? Because you're not just saying inside or outside of the 12 or 1300 buildings, you're also saying the potential areas around those buildings, correct?
Yeah, the area that I circled and showed you, yes, sir.
But it would also include the courtyard area, correct?
In between 12 and 13?
Correct.
Yes.
It would also include the parking lot, correct? Isn't that your testimony?
Not really. I believed it was coming from where I was saying, like I said, it was reverberating down that wall. Could it possibly? I mean, I'm not going to speculate the thing, but I'm telling you what I felt at that moment and my belief at that moment.
Are you saying that your testimony is that you're eliminating the parking lot as a possibility?
I'm saying that my testimony was that I believe the shots were coming from somewhere in the area between the 12 and the 1300 building.
Okay.
The west side of the 1200 building, possibly the east side of the 1300 building would be my testimony.
Gotcha.
And I believe I said that in my deposition.
Now, at some point, when shots go off again, you yell active shooter, correct?
Yes. I actually yelled it to the officer that was standing on the outside of the fence.
And in response to that, you hear something, correct?
I'm not sure what you're asking, sir.
Was there another cop
who
said something to you?
Yes. Well, I don't know if it was a police officer or not. When I was moving from the inside the parking lot, as I have Kyle, I'm actually yelling active shooter, active kill. I don't remember exactly what it is, active shooter, whatever, screaming at the top of my lungs. Somebody tells me, and I'd have to refer to exact wordage, but something to the fact of, basically they're shooting at us, get the fuck down, something along those lines. I have no independent recollection of who that was. I never saw anybody. All I heard was a voice. I'm not sure if it was a police officer who was on the outside. I've never been able, nobody's ever come to me and told me who it was. But it sounded like the terminology that a police officer was used. So I do assume that it was a police officer telling me to get the fuck down.
And specifically, if I heard you correctly, and you've read your deposition, the words that person shouts is, their contraction for multiple, they're shooting at us. They're shooting at us. That's what you heard, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And you believe that to be true, correct?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that goes to the +1 rule.
Right. The only reason why you knew that there was shooting going on specifically in the 1200 building and not outside or the areas around it or on top or in the courtyard area is because someone came up and told you that. Isn't that correct?
Yes, because I went towards them and found him, yes.
Got it. And then you take that information, and you thought that was pretty important information for everybody on scene to know, correct?
Yes.
So important that you didn't call the general police line, you called 911.
Yeah, like I said, I think by mistake I actually called our non-emergency number, but I got through and I talked to our communication supervisor and provided that information. I don't know if it was a 911 call or not.
And so specifically, you recall that the person that you spoke to at 911 was named Pat Thurman.
Yes.
Isn't that correct?
Yes.
So you have a specific recollection during the shooting of calling into 911 and relaying critical information that there is an active shooter inside the 1200 building. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you know what Pat Thurman did with that information?
I do not.
Pat Thurman works for Coral Springs, not for BSO.
Yeah, that's the state, Mr. Igosh, you are not the witness, so you need to form your comments in the form of a question to the witness in your cross-examination. Go ahead, sir.
Isn't it a fact that Pat Thurman works for Coral Springs, yes or no?
Yes, he's a supervisor in our communications division.
Okay. And you're aware that the communications that exist with Coral Springs is separate from the communications of BSO, correct?
Yes.
You don't share radios unless they are patched and intentionally joined together, correct?
That is correct.
So a BSO deputy, like my client, would never get that critical information unless it's shared from Coral Springs to BSO. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
And or unless radios are patched, correct? Is that a yes?
Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't know that was a question.
Did you think when you made that information, when you gave that critical information, that that would make its way to my client and other BSO deputies?
Of course.
You believe that that information was critical, correct?
Of course.
You were informed that there were multiple teams inside of the building, correct?
Yes.
And that's why you don't go in, because there's teams already in there.
Correct.
Explain for the jurors why it's not just a free-for-all and how there's some like hierarchy in law enforcement. Explain how you just don't decide on your own to just go in and do something.
Well, like I said, I could testify previously, when we got to the position, we had every intent and purpose of going inside a building, but when we met with the deputy that was on the corner, he advised there was already a large number of people in there, and at that point, because we assumed that they had already started searching the building and actually moving from floor to floor, we didn't want to cause a problem to where you had, like I said, friendly fire, things like that. Where you come in and you surprise somebody that's trying to find what they at the time was an active killer inside that building.
Very reasonable, but explain to them when you say friendly fire, you don't just run in, because when you've got teams in there, what could happen?
No, you can get shot.
Even if you're in law enforcement gear, that could happen.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes, it's a stressful situation.
So those situations have to be controlled. People can't just run in willy-nilly, correct?
Correct.
And by the way, you're wearing a vest at this point. You got a vest from someone.
Yeah, it's a
Why
SWAT
did you?
vest.
What's that?
It was a SWAT vest.
Okay.
One of our SWAT vests.
Why did you think it was important to wear a SWAT vest? It's obvious, but again, I want to make sure everybody's clear.
Because there was an active killer shooting people at our school.
And you didn't know that shots, wouldn't hit you, correct?
That's correct.
You know that my client didn't have a vest that day, correct?
I did not know that.
The times that you've ever seen my client on campus, did you ever see him wearing a vest?
I never actually really paid attention to whether he wore a vest or not.
Now, even though there were teams going into the building, you still chose to take a tactical position of cover, did you not?
That's correct.
Explain to the jurors first what a tactical position of cover is.
Basically, we use the building to prevent being shot. Basically, use that as cover and concealment, anticipating that either somebody active shooter would come out of the building or start shooting again from inside the building outside.
So there was a genuine concern when you're on campus there during that shooting. There could be shots coming from anywhere, correct?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, when we specifically got there and we looked up and we saw the windows on the third floor that were shot out, it was a very uneasy feeling of where we were, and that was the whole reason why we took a position of cover on the other side of the building. It was a much better area for us because we had actually, like I said, the building was able to provide more cover for us at that position than it was standing on which would have been the south side of building 13.
The windows that you saw shot out, that was on the west side of the building,
yes,
correct?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
It could have been west or, I think it would have been west side.
Okay. If I can show you a picture
Sure.
and let us know whether this fairly and accurately depicts kind of, first of all, the west side of the 1200 building.
Yes.
Well, Mr. Iron, that item is not there. Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
There's more stuff, more building to the left, but
Correct.
I think there was some more to the left, but yes.
Does this memorialize the windows that you saw
Yeah.
shot out? Okay. Let me get it marked, and I'd like to introduce it, Judge, so there's no issue. Okay, can we do that?
It can certainly be marked. State, you have any objection to the defense introducing evidence not in their case in chief?
No, Judge, I have no objections.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, typically the way the trial works, the state puts on their case, they rest, the defense puts on their case, and we have a rule that you can only introduce evidence while you are presenting your case. However, by the agreement of the attorneys, if there's no objections, sometimes one party will introduce evidence in the other party's case. So although we are still in the state's presentation, without objection from the state, defense, you're asking to move defense exhibit A for identification into evidence right now?
Yes, sir.
And Ms. Gomes, you have no objection?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, so without objection, defense exhibit A for identification is now going to be in evidence. That is defense exhibit 1.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, State. Just this photo that I just showed you,
Yes.
just so we're clear, that is on the west side of the 1200 building, correct?
That is correct.
My client's on the entirely other side, the east side, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. There's no way physically for him to see these windows from where he's positioned, isn't that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. If you could take a look, show us the windows that you saw that had been shot out?
I don't remember. It was on the third floor. I don't remember the numbers of one, but
Gotcha.
it was on the third floor, and like I said, I can't tell you specific of it.
And that's fine. But one of these windows over here,
Yes,
correct?
Yeah, somewhere along the top building of these windows over here.
Okay. So, tactical positions of cover, that's not being a coward, correct? Like, you weren't a coward, you took a tactical position of cover.
That's
how
correct.
you're trained, correct? And under what circumstances do they train you to take tactical positions of cover?
Lots of situations when there's, when you're in danger, when you're being shot at. Well, it depends what's going on in that situation.
And should you leave your tactical position of cover pursuant to the training when you still feel like you're in danger and might have potential sniper fire?
That would depend, sir.
Okay. You didn't leave your tactical position of cover until you knew you were safe, correct?
At that situation, at that time, yeah, there was no, like I said, there was no gunfire going off, correct?
Right. And no one came out with like a white flag to tell everybody, hey, it's safe, right? You had to make that determination on your own, correct?
It was determined by the people over the radio system and then passed on to me.
Got it. And that was your radio system, Coral Springs Radio.
There was the BSO deputy and our Lanao would be our chief that had a radio. So I was just going off of what they were telling me. I didn't have any real-time information through the radio.
And by the way, you weren't the only one who took a tactical position of cover. If I heard you correctly yesterday, Captain McKeon, who's a SWAT commander,
Yes.
he took a tactical position of cover too, correct?
Well, I don't know if he's a SWAT commander at that point, but I don't remember exactly. I'm not sure what his position was at that point. But yeah, he took a tactical position with me.
But I wrote down SWAT commander, so did he become a SWAT commander?
I don't want to be misquote what his exact thing is. He was in the SWAT team. He obviously had I don't know what his position, if he's an XO or if he was a commander. I'm not sure of his position at that point. That would have to be answered. I think he was a commander, but I don't know that for sure.
But at a minimum, he's part of
Yes.
the SWAT unit. He is trained as a SWAT officer, and he took a position of cover, did he not?
Yes.
And it was your words that when you took a position of cover, he, they, however many people you thought they, quote, could be anywhere. Isn't that correct? Those were your words.
I mean, we knew the last place that they were, based off the information that we had, was the last place that the shooting was taking place. The last gunfire that was found was inside of Building 12, is the information that we
But
had.
when you took a position of cover, you didn't know where potentially sniper fire could be coming from,
We
correct?
believed that the shooter was inside of Building 12.
Okay.
That's what we believed at that time.
You still were in fear, however, that at any moment you could be under sniper fire, correct?
Well, under fire, yes.
And the only reason why you knew at that point that there was only one shooter versus multiple is because you were then informed of that, correct?
That's correct.
One final question. You've never sat down with my client at any time to say, hey, tell me what you were thinking, what happened during this? No? Okay.
I've never spoken to him.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate you.
Okay, based on that, can you read your written?
Yes, Judge.
Go ahead.
Sergeant, you started to say something, you were cut off a bit, I just want you to clarify. You said that if you had been in uniform and had your gun and you were in that area, you would have ran into that building. What do you mean?
I would have ran towards that sound of that gunfire. I wouldn't have run into a building because I didn't, like I said the day before, I didn't know where exactly it was coming from. I was only able to ascertain that I felt, based on the observations that I had and the active stimulus that I had at that time, that the gunshots were coming from somewhere in the area between 12 and 1300 building in that open area. Like I said before, and I stated yesterday, is it could have been on the roof, could have been in the thing, but if I were in a situation and would have been armed in that situation, that is the area in which I would have gone to.
And why do you go towards that area?
Because when the gunshots are going off, you have to assume somebody's dying in that situation.
Does the +1 rule relieve you of your duty to investigate the sound of gunfire?
No,
Why not?
because there's gunfire going off. In a situation like that where we believe it to be an active shooter on a school campus, the only way to stop the active shooter is to stop the threat. The faster we get there, that's why we've gone away from the team and locking down the perimeter and waiting for SRT. Back in the day when I first started, we set a perimeter, You waited for the SRT team or SWAT team to show up, and they went in because they had all the training. That training has gone by the wayside, and we've gone to what's now known as a single officer response. So as a school resource officer, if an active shooter event happens at your school, you are expected to go towards the sound of gunfire and eliminate the threat.
And is that training well established?
Yes.
Well understood?
Yes.
Across the board, whether it's Coral Springs Police Department or the Broward Sheriff's Office, that's what's instructed?
Yes.
Now, I'm going to use defense as demonstrative. You were actually a couple hundred yards away when you first heard the gunfire, correct?
Yes, I was, on the baseball field.
Okay, and from that distance, you still knew that those were gunshots as you moved closer?
Once I got the other stimulation, like I said before, and when I first initially thought it was fireworks, because you had the fire alarm. I mean, that's what you thought. But then once you get the other stimulation of the kids running, the information from Bonner, all those things which I was able to obtain by going towards what was going on, I was able to get that information, and that was able to allow me to say, okay, yeah, this isn't just fireworks anymore, this is a much more serious situation.
And whether it's fireworks or firecrackers, as a school resource officer, when you were a school resource officer, or even that day on the field, do you move towards those sounds?
Yes, well, you have to go investigate it. I mean, that's what even if it's fireworks, you're going to go investigate if it's fireworks. Because throwing a fireworks into a school, setting off an alarm is a violation of school policy. Could be some criminal, opportunities in that also, as criminal investigation, things like that. You're going to go and investigate that.
That information that you were able to relay to dispatch, you had that information because you moved towards the sound of gunfire, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, Coach Bonner didn't have a gun on him that day.
No, he did not.
And did Aaron Feist have a gun on him?
No.
Did David Taylor have a gun on him?
No.
Did Chris Hickson have a gun on him?
No.
Did Scot Peterson have a gun on him?
Yes.
Based on your training and experience, as you got closer to the gunshots, even though you had seen this window, and at that point you know there's gunfire, you still continued to investigate those sounds and remained in that proximity, correct?
Correct. The only time we stopped was once we found out that there were people inside the building already searching the building. And like I explained before, we didn't want to cause a problem with the number of people that were already inside that building. And then we were removed. Once the SWAT team got there from BSO, they went in and they took over command of that building and the two teams searched the building.
I want to discuss the position of cover that you explained. You explained that if you believe you are under gunfire, it can, depending on the circumstances, make sense to take a position of cover, correct? Yes. All right. Now, does that change whether there's active stimulus of the sounds of gunfire versus no active stimulus?
Yes, and it changes in the situation that you're in. We at that point when we took the thing, we knew there was people already inside the building dealing with the problem that was going on inside the building. And by us going in there could exacerbate that and cause more complex problems. So you take a position of cover. If somebody does show themselves and start shooting out the window, we would have returned fire. We would have, shot at the suspect or whatever situation thing. So that's the whole idea of taking a position of cover in that situation. And if somebody, I don't know what's going on. Maybe they're going up one side of the stairs and the guy comes down the other side of the stairs and pops out a door. We're in a position of cover then to take take the appropriate measures to take that person into custody or to use lethal force if necessary.
Now, if you believe that there is sniper fire coming from the 1200 building, is it a tactical position of cover to stand in the line of that sniper fire?
I don't know exactly where he was standing, so I don't feel comfortable.
Well, not where he was standing. I'm asking you generally. I agree.
I mean, solid walls, concrete, those are all considered good cover. A concealment is more like something like a tree or a bush or something like that can actually, the difference between like cover and concealment is cover is like a hard surface, like a concrete wall, an engine block of a vehicle, things like that. Where concealment is, yeah, I'm behind a hedge, but if somebody starts shooting, the hedge isn't going to stop me from getting shot. Yeah, it gives me concealment. Maybe the person doesn't see me as well, but so that's the difference before. So if If he was behind a wall or a concrete, yes, that would be a place of cover.
And again, let me phrase it this way. If you're not behind a wall, if you're standing exposed to potential sniper fire, is that a tactical position of cover?
No.
And in that sense, would it make sense to move closer to the building?
I would move to the nearest piece of cover that I could, whether it be a pillar or a wall, a side of a wall, a side of a building, something that gives me that hard cover.
And again, all of this is determined by whether there's gunfire or there isn't gunfire,
Correct.
stimulus or no stimulus.
Correct.
Okay. And now you, at some point, did take a tactical position of cover, correct?
Yes.
Did you remain in that position of cover for 48 minutes?
I remained there until we were told over the radio that he no longer was in the building, and that was when I hooked up with our canine officer, Kohberger, and we began searching for the suspect on the southwest corner of the school.
Just a moment to confirm.
No problem.
Do you want the monitor on?
Yes, please. Judge, I'm going to hand this back to the clerk. I have no further questions.
Based on that and recross.
Just one question.
Please.
The last thing that was covered was you, if I heard you correctly, you remained in that tactical position of cover until you knew it was safe to come out, correct?
Until we were told that the suspect was no longer in the building. He had not been caught at that moment when we were actually actively searching. We were told that based on the video evidence that they were eventually able to get, that he was no longer in that building, that he had left the building and was last going westbound through the school.
Okay. So you knew that it was no longer, first of all, you knew there was only one suspect at that point, correct?
Yeah, that was all the information we had at that point, yes.
And you also knew that he was no longer shooting, correct?
That's correct. There were no shots for quite some time.
And then you came out of your tactical position of cover, correct?
Yes, once we were told that that he had left that building and was no longer in that immediate area where we believed him being in 1200 building, we then began to search the rest of the school.
Right. Thank you, sir.
State, is the witness excused?
Yes, Judge, state the witness.
Okay, you may step down.
Thank you.
Very much, sir. While he's doing that, State, you want to start with your next witness? Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, real quick restroom break. Same admonition as always. Please don't discuss the facts of the case, the evidence, the witnesses, or the testimony amongst yourselves or anyone else until we reach the end of the trial. I'll tell you when that is. Please don't do any research directly or indirectly. If you will leave your notepads in your chairs and step in the back home.
That's segment number 1. There is more to come. Press subscribe so you don't miss any of our continuing coverage. I'm Tony Bruschi. Stay with us.
This has been a special report from True Crime Today and the Hidden Killers podcast.